of religion. So at the end of the day, it looks like belief and religion is defined by different individuals based on, say, for example, their experience or the stories they have had and they have read over time, right? So in vast majority of instances, when this belief system and these ideologies don't align, people conflict. And this conflict tends to result to like insurmountable amount of issues within society in vast majority of instances. So we want to remove these issues and create a world where every particular person is responsible and accountable for their actions and, say, for example, anything that they engage in vast majority of instances. But then what we need to talk about again is on the idea of, like, say, for example, responsibility and like the impact of the law in vast majority of instances. We think the biggest argument that you're going to get from opposition is say religion is a very important part of the society. Religion is very important because it guides people on how to necessarily behave. It creates some sort of bedrock for how society should function in that regard. We think it is not true because when you say like religion in itself is a bedrock for societal function, it becomes very, very problematic to have multiple societal function, especially when society in itself is supposed to like accept one set of things and like abide within the particular acceptance of yourself. So you can't necessarily have like different bedrock to the same particular society of yourself. Take for example, say particular place like Nigeria, right, where we have a law that is supposed to guide the behavior of individualism in that regard. So we cannot then say that, oh, religion is supposed to be like the bedrock for which the society is built. Because when you build the society on religion, you're going to have like multiple issues because different persons are going to necessarily have like different opinion and different belief systems, right? So you create more problem like for this particular individual in himself. But then we allow the law to take its focus because individuals then know that, oh, it is not about whether or not they have like religious belief. They are supposed to be like law-abiding citizens and they have like, some civil obligation to the state. So in that regard, whether or not their belief or say, for example, religion is supposed to like push them to a certain path in and of itself, they now know that, oh, in fact, the idea then is that religion is not even in existence. Or say, for example, people don't have the idea of dogmatism or say, for example, things like the all-powerful God. So they now know that, oh, they have certain responsibility and the responsibility is supposed to be their, like the most important thing that they do. But even if like they don't like necessarily have the perception of what religion is supposed to be, it creates a world where society, like law can take a focus and run the extent at which society functions, right? So you can easily say, oh, you are guilty of the law and you get punished, right? But in a world where we allow like religion and of itself, you have a scenario where people can just commit crime, confess, and don't get punished because then it is believed that the all-powerful God has forgiven them and they are like good to go, right? We think that is very, very problematic in and of itself. Shape your
I think you need to be clear. It is your side of the house that houses God on earth. Our side of the house where God does not exist. You need to engage that comparative. I think you're arguing an up case.
So the idea is this: we're not going to house God on earth. The idea is that we won't want an immortal and all-powerful God. We want God to be one of us. The idea of having God being one of us necessarily means that God has every particular attribute of human being and is perceived as a regular person. So at the end of the day, he's not seen as someone that should be obeyed or like someone that should be followed or a particular entity that dictates every other person's like endeavor or necessarily how they should behave in society in vast majority of instances. So when we remove this idea of immortality and all powerfulness, we then perceive that, oh, we don't even see him as a god anymore. We see him as like a regular person and everybody goes about doing their own business in vast majority of instances, right? But we think also that another issue that we necessarily solve is an intra-religious conflicts that necessarily like happen when we still perceive that God is powerful and immortal and that we should follow him, right? We think that within like similar religion or within same religion of itself, we have different individuals like defining different topics or defining different beliefs or different ideologies to mean different things to themselves individually. So you have them like doing things to suit themselves. So to that extent, you create a divide, and that divide continues to multiply when we don't have like an acceptable ground for which like religious activities is supposed to happen, or an acceptable ground for which religion of itself is supposed to like have its own doctrine and say, for example, its own practices in vast majority of instances. But the erasure of all of this like particular existence is one that creates a better world for all of us, because then we have a society that does not like dogmatize the idea of God, but a society that necessarily just operates on laws and give every particular individual the opportunity to be responsible and accountable for their own actions, whether or not they necessarily like what the law says or not, right? But then we think that necessarily we also have to engage the idea that religious diversity. Yeah, proud to propose.
Yeah, so Jedi Knight, please. It's after 7:15 that you stop the speaker, please. Just so you note that, I beg of you. You stop the speaker only after 7:15, and I would be the one to stop the speaker. Thank you. So we thank the Prime Minister for that speech, and then we call on Leader of Opposition. I just really hope Jedi Knight noted that. So, Leader of Opposition, are you ready? Can someone confirm I'm audible?
I am ready.
All right. So please, I would really appreciate everybody if everyone took note of the timestamps. I just want to re-emphasize this. 7:15. I'm going to tell you your time is up, and I'm going to unmute and stop you. If you also want to ask POIs, I really don't want situations where we're asking POIs after the 6 minutes, and then it's going to be unruly. So please, I noticed that several people are trying to ask POIs from this other chat space. I really don't want there to be confusion. So the chat space I'm using to time, please let POIs be addressed there. I would really appreciate that. I don't know if it's more comfortable for debaters to use this other one, or you know what? Let's just use the general one. The mystery chat space on top of mystery ground stack. Let's just use that one for asking POIs. Thank you guys so much. All right, so Leader of Opposition, you there?
Yeah, I am.
All right, so ready when you are.
Great. POI is in the text space. I am looking at the text space. If you have a POI, please just keep it to the text space. Do not unmute. Do not interrupt my speech. I am timing myself also, and I'm going to try to keep to time. So with that, and without any further ado, I'm going to be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think it's a good thing that this debate is happening on an Easter Sunday, because according to the Christian celebration, today we celebrate the resurrection of God in human form. The problem is, opening government assumes that when God is one of us, you can solve all the religious issues that exist in status quo. I am sorry to say, the same people that killed Jesus and made him die and suffer, note that after his death and after he left, that was when we saw a mass span of different religious groups and different religious institutions, all because even when he sent his son to come and live amongst us, people did not still believe in him, and people wanted to find an alternative to whatever belief they wanted to have. Happy Easter to everyone. According to the WDC manual, in a prefer motion, up teams must defend status quo, and golf teams are advised to give a proper characterization of their word, given that they are mostly defending a hypothetical word or an unrealistic word. The reason why this is so is so that we can understand what this proposed hypothetical word looks like. 3 flaws then in the PM speech. 1, there is no characterization whatsoever on what this new word for which you want us to prefer looks like. There is no mechanization on how this word is more likely going to look like, given that you want to prefer a word that creates a power vacuum that exists in status quo. I think it's only fair for you to tell us what then replaces that power vacuum you want to take out, or whether or not God is still going to have the same power he has when he is going to be amongst us. The third flaw is there is no way up. There's no comparison on why our word is better, or why their word is better than status quo. I'm going to show you why they don't solve any issue that they solve. Given this lack of proper PM duty roles, I don't think opening government stands a chance to win this debate, even if the Deputy Prime Minister comes with a speech masterclass. 2 extensive arguments, 2 extensive contributions. One, we are going to talk about the preservation of the divine authority and why status quo is comparatively better to their word. The second thing we are going to talk about is why in our world you maintain the sacredness of the divine, which has a lot of pragmatic utility. But first, why can't opening government win this debate? You need to note that there is a difference between the existence of a God and the existence of religion as an institution. Note, the reason why, and this is because when PM started his speech, he told you that this is not a debate about the Christian God, neither is it a debate about the Muslim God. This is a debate about every single God that exists. That is to say, if we agree, and we do agree with that certain premise in itself, the problem that we have in status quo, which is intra-religious conflicts that they talk about, the multiplicity of religions, how there are different peoples that have different interpretations of God. This is not a problem because of the existence of the all-powerful, immortal God. This is a problem because man, in a quest to have dominance, has tried to give different interpretations, to break religions institutions, and to have different interpretations for those religious institutions that can favor man himself. And because of man's greed, because of man's corrupt nature in itself, man has altered this particular dominance of spiritual intuition. The problem then is, in a world where God decides to be one of us, you are still going to have all those issues existing, because it's even going to be worse. Imagine that God is now one of us. Then you think that all these different religions are not going to legitimize that particular opportunity and make things worse. We don't think religious conflicts are solved in their world the way they want you to believe. My partner will do more on responses and rebuttals. Let's talk about our world. Why don't we prefer that word, and why are we okay with status quo? Closing government, shoot a POI before I proceed.
Believing in God on earth.
I didn't get that.
Do people stop believing in God in Gulf?
I don't know. I don't know about whether people stop believing in God, right? It's more likely going to happen on either sides of the house. In our world where God has so much power, some people still don't believe in him. In your world where he's going to come and be amongst humanity, I wonder what makes it any different. Let's talk about the preservation of the divine authority and why our world is better. There are two analyses here. One, note, maintaining God's status as an immortal and all-powerful being reinforces the idea of a divine authority and an absolute morality. If God were to be one of us, it means that you undermine that perceived authority of the divine commandments and the moral guidance, potentially leading to moral relativism and social instability. Two pragmatic harms. One, you have a world where people can live lives the way they want to because there exists no moral arbiter that exists in an unbiased way as God has in status quo. But secondly, you are more likely going to legitimize man creating and naming himself as a god, because that all-powerful immortal being that we ascribe our source of origination to is now amongst one of us. It means you legitimize every single harm that opening government thinks their world solves. Secondly, we think you need to maintain the sacredness of the divine that creates a balance of control in status quo. Two things. One, because the belief in an immortal, all-powerful God serves as a source of solace, inspiration, and hope for many individuals. The reason why this is important is because not everyone is as rich as the other. We think poor people need to get solace. The belief in the unbiased, all-powerful, all-merciful God. If God, therefore, were to be one of us, that sacredness of the divine becomes compromised, and you potentially erode the spiritual foundation upon which many people rely for comfort and guidance. But secondly, it means that God now has the potential to be corrupt in God's word because he is now in human form. The reason why he is different from us, the reason why we ascribe our source of inspiration and we believe in him is because of that lack of human tendencies he is more likely going to have. In a world where God becomes one of us, you can compromise him, he becomes corruptible, and society will to oppose.
Right. We thank leader of opposition for that speech. We then call on Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case for the opening comments. Here. Deputy Prime Minister.
I'll be looking at my time. So, without further ado, I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. This house prefers a world where God was one of us. There are two basic ways of defining this motion. So we could always say, at the point where God is one of us, it means God is a human. And to the extent where such a person is a human, then definitely such a person is not God, which means God does not exist. Secondly, we could always imagine a world where, at the end of the day, the idea is about God being not being immortal, right, and not being all powerful, which means God exists, He dwells amongst men, but then, like, after some time, He's going to die off. After some time, He's probably going to ill. He's going to be sick. He's going to eat and stuff like that. So at the end of the day, He's not all powerful. So what my partner did was to actually establish a framework where the idea or the assumption was that God did not exist. And then opinion opposition said we mischaracterized, we did not define our word properly because we did not tell them it's pretty obvious from my partner's speech. Because when my partner spoke, they did not question his framing about like God not existing in that sense. So they allowed that framing. And then they came up and then they say, oh, well, at the end of the day, we mischaracterize. So let's engage their word and the whole idea of like preserving the divine authority and sacredness of the divine. Notice that in the second definition to this motion, right, at the end of the day, our word is not going to be a word where there is a loss or a death of religion in that sense. Meaning, even though there is no all-powerful God, at the end of the day, we still think that even in status quo where certain like religious sects exist, we don't think that these people are called like the power of existing God to these religious sects. We think that certain people have a cult-like following and they have adherents that follow them, like, you know, to the latter, right? We think that certain people that sort of like have a certain level of charismatic attraction to certain other people, and these people are human. They see these people as human. We don't think that all of the solace and all of the contributions of, you know, having a particular sort of like religious inclination is something that's going to be lost in our world if we follow the second definition to this motion. But notice also, Panem, that at the end of the day, they say that absolute morality is going to be like not existent in our world because, well, God is the arbiter of like morality, and so necessarily at a point where God does not exist, you know, comparing our word with this, so necessarily like this whole world is going to fall into a state of disrepair and all of that. I think my partner is overemphasize the fact that the law is going to have a lot of roles to play. It exists to ensure that it cuts down the excesses of human beings. Because we think in status quo, where open opposition lives in, necessarily not everyone subscribes to the idea of religion, which means those people that don't subscribe to the idea of religion will have the leeway to say, oh, I can just kill somebody. But then the law exists because the law is existent regardless of any sort of like, you know, moral or other sort of like considerations, which means the law is necessarily going to like take over the role of like, you know, moral arbiter in that sense. So the idea of them saying that God, even though God is all powerful, right, within certain religions, God is going to be the absolute dictator or absolute arbiter of morality does not even exist in their word. This is also that we think that the basis to like survival is sometimes going to necessarily allow people to exist even in a world where the perception is that God does not exist or God is not all powerful and all of that stuff that we talk about. Notice that the social contract theory tells us that people are going to come into like beneficial alliances to ensure that they can be protected. Because if they are, and if you don't believe in God, you can necessarily raise your hand at me. It means definitely that nobody is safe in that way, except you're the most powerful, right? And if you're not the most powerful, you need to ensure that you have something to back you up, which means people who know that they are necessarily vulnerable or they could always be vulnerable another at like any other point in time, could necessarily come into like a certain contract that, oh, well, I'm not going to raise my hand at you. you're not going to raise your hand at me. So at the end of the day, we come into a mutual agreement to fight with those who want to raise their hands at us, not sticking to this existing contract. Which means, in that sense, the law acts as a larger blanket of protection for us. Which means these people already have an existing motivation to want to do the right things within these sort of spaces. And I cannot overemphasize on the capacity of the law being existent in our salary world, like my member told you, ensuring that all of these things are properly, sorry about that, properly arbitrated. Notice also in our word, when you increase a higher level of ability, quickly shoot.
Yeah, so you are assuming as though God will have an army like a nation, so that when Ukraine goes to them, they can go and fight Russia and win the war for them. Is that what you mean by social contract theory and when people align themselves with stronger people?
Oh my goodness. All right, so you misunderstood what I said. What I said was that even though a certain level of absolute morality will not exist in our world, according to what OO says, because OO says that if God does not exist, morality is going to break down. I told you that individuals still have a level of motivation to want to actually continue to do what is right. That is the summary of what I said earlier. So let's move on to other things that they say. At the end of the day, they also say that at the end of the day, at the point where God does not have all power or he's mortal, at the end of the day, God is going to have the capacity to be corrupt. So a juxtaposition to this is as simple as the whole idea of Jesus Christ. So we can always juxtapose this with Jesus Christ and follow my logic. Jesus Christ wasn't all powerful when he was on earth. He dwelled amongst men. He took the form of many, ate and he drank. At the end of the day, even when he had certain miracles, he kept alluding these powers to the Father. So he could not be said to have had absolute power in that sense, and necessarily acted as a human within that space. One level of characterization you should notice is that this did not reduce religious authenticity in any way. We think that people necessarily subscribe to his ideals regardless, which means religion is not going to break down on our side of the board. Secondly, I think also that at the end of the day, followers are going to already grow because people are moved by the things that they see and stuff like that. So even if you say that, oh well, God is going to have all power in our side of the world, at least there's going to be a certain level of power that is going by OO's characterization. But then moving on to the concern of corruption and stuff like that about what OO talks about. At the end of the day, even if a God is going to have the capacity to be corrupt, even though juxtaposition with Jesus Christ does not necessarily mean he got corrupt, even if in the worst case that he gets the capacity to be corrupt, we think that at the end of the day, this only serves the interest of these people who want to subscribe to these religions. They could always opt out, which means even if they leave such a religion, they are not going to descend into lawlessness, opening opposition characterized in our side of the world. And so on the final way, we think we necessarily they are opening opposition. We are proud to propose.
All right. We thank Deputy Prime Minister for that speech. We then call on the DLO, Deputy Level Opposition, to continue the case for open opposition and to summarize the top half.
Am I audible?
DLO.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Am I audible? Can you hear me? And check,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Okay, I can hear you now. Proceed.
Okay, sure. So I'm not looking at the first space. So if you have POI, you can just sorry. You can simply unmute and say POI in my 50 minutes, please. Don't if you're mute before my 50 minutes, I'm not going to take you. So just unmute in my 50 minutes and then you say POI, then sure. Let me just set my timer. Just give me 30 seconds. Sorry. Okay, sure. Mascot, I've seen it. Sure. Chair, am I still audible?
Yeah, you are. Please proceed.
Oh, sure. I'm starting now. So, if I'm still audible, gender pronoun is he, him. So, I'm starting in 3, 2, 1, go. So, panel, we think the biggest case we have gotten from OG so far, which I think CG is also going to engage on, is on relatability of God. That when God becomes a human, or when he becomes one of us, he becomes more and more relatable to us, right? You think Mascot already takes away that particular argument in his speech, right? But we think on the way up, right? When we weigh it on relatability, why we still prefer our word where, in response to OG now, we are on the argument on relatability. Why we still prefer our word on where God is not one of us is because we think the existence of God not being one of us simply means that people believe that every particular thing that happens to them in life, an uncorruptible and an all-caring God knows about it and he wants it to happen because he knows best. That is how come when people have things like death or they die suddenly, they'll tell you that it is God that gives and God takes. So it simply means people can find solace in those particular moments. So it increases even their faith and their belief in God because necessarily they believe that this particular God cares for both sinners and the righteous people. That is why he sent his rain to both sinners, to both unrighteous people, and then his sun shines on both the sinners and the unrighteous people. So they believe that at every particular point in time, they encounter or face anything in life. So it simply means that God cares. So whatever they are facing is not because of God doesn't care. What happens in God's world and why even from CG's POI is because when you start believing in God and he becomes one of you, when evil happens in your life, it simply means you can start questioning that particular God directly. What then happens in their world is when you start questioning that God directly, there is now tendency of you starting feeling like this particular God is so much favoristic, right? He has people that is favoring so much. Maybe he's favoring the black over the white, or he's favoring the white over the black. Because human intuition, as far as you're having issues, and then I see that particular person there, you feel like the person it's not helping you in those kind of instances. Right? We think those is very, very important. But the second thing they argue for is how it creates peace, because simply means people can have one particular God they believe in. I think Mascot already takes it this away in his framing. When he tells you the problem with religion is not the fundamental or the foundation of religion. Muslims, Buddhists, Christians believe that there's one supreme God, right, who have sovereignty over all. The only problem now comes from how do we worship him? How then do you best understand this particular God and not who this particular God is? Too extensive for me. First of all, I'm going to talk about lots of agency. Secondly, I'm going to talk about moral hazard and 3 layers of analysis to that. Lots of agency. Panel, understand that with an all-powerful God, an entity, right, not now being existent among us, all right, controlling everything. What it simply means is that it is going to reduce human free will and human ability to take responsibility of their action. What it simply means is the reason why if you are caught in sin or you are caught in stealing, you're going to be held accountable is because the rules and regulations on the laws are there. And when you now have a God that is now living with us, it simply means human is going to have that loss of agency. How is this particular argumentation true? 2 things. One, it simply means that whenever that the idea of free will no longer exists, the reason why people still have free will is because they believe that yes, there is a God, but that particular God doesn't stifle you so much from doing things that you want to do. But when this God now starts living among us, it simply means even before you do anything, you have to inquire directly from this particular God to know if it is right or wrong. When someone thinks or when someone commits offense, we no longer judge them by the law constitution of that land. We have to go over that particular God and ask him, is this person justifiable to be killed and all that? What it simply means is it stifles that human ability to have that agency and free will to even make decisions and be responsible or accountable for their decision, because necessarily it means whatever decision that you make and it goes wrong, we can simply go and hold that particular God accountable directly because we are seeing him and he's the one that is giving you the authority. I cannot come now and steal and tell that God sent me to steal. You're going to say, where did you see that particular God? But if the God is existing, right, and I now steal, I can simply say that it is that particular God that made me to come and steal. He's going to come to answer for himself. Like it's going to make all those particular things very, very messy. So it simply means human loss of agency and free will in some sense is going to go. Some of the analysis you can get from this is simply means it can stifle humans' innovations or ability to grow or self-depend and think within themselves. It is something it is very, very important. But before I go on my argument on moral hazard, who omitted? Shoot up you.
The extent where people can question God, people can hold God accountable, is that not a good thing? Don't you think it enriches the religious landscape?
It is in our world you get that best, because in our world you can't hold this God accountable. Like you cannot come and directly hold him accountable because you believe that he's living in high heaven above. When God lives with you directly, right? This is the second argumentation I'm going on, but let me just respond to that. It's in your period. When God starts living with you directly, it simply means anything that goes wrong will definitely be on that particular God's head. If your government is very bad and corrupt, they will say that particular God is the reason why they are not prospering. So it simply means your evil leaders cannot dodge accountability so much because they believe that there is a God that controls everything. He's an all-powerful from the emotion. This is something that is very, very important. What is those particular moral hazard we tell you in today's debate, right? When you know that you have an all-powerful God, so it simply means everybody is going to rely on him to fix every problems of the world. So every particular problem that comes from the world, it definitely means you are relying on this particular God to make sure that he does this. But then, most importantly is that we think as human beings, right, there are a lot of things that can happen to us where we can't explain because they are mostly above our understanding. When these things happen, people need some sort of intuitive compensation that explains it to them, things like death, etc. It simply means they get that particular thing from God. So that's why we tell you that death is a mystery. So whenever things happens to people, they can simply find that solace from God because they believe that there is a God that is an all-knowing. What have we proven to you in today's debate, right? So I've proven to you three things, right? In summary of what I've proven to you from opinion position. One, we tell you how easily relatability to God when it's one of us becomes very, very bad because it simply means that any instance where you experience anything, those compensation that you want to get, you want to get it directly because you feel that this particular God is not unjust or he's very, very corruptible, or he has to put his side. You get that particular thing from my partner when he talks to you about preservation of divine authority. Second thing I'm proving to you is on the issue of moral hazard, how it takes away free will people or agency of people to make those particular decisions. Thirdly, we talk to you about how it creates that kind of solace in people. That is how come even when people are suffering or Christians or whatever it is are suffering, they still believe that there's a God that is in heaven that cares so much about them, even though they are sinners, that will still visit them with wealth in a particular or certain day. Between those particular things simply makes it much more possible. When this particular God becomes very, very relatable to you, it simply means when things go bad in your life, you can simply start losing your faith or your belief in this particular God because you simply feel he's seeing it, he's directly seeing it, and he's not doing anything. But last and most importantly, we tell you how it's not simply means human being cannot dodge accountability or responsibility towards things. They can believe that everything that is happening is this particular God. So even when your government becomes bad, they can tell you to hold that particular God accountable, and it makes it so much messy. Side opening opposition.
All right, we thank the DLO for that speech that concludes the top half. We then invite member of government to begin the closing out for us. Here. Member of government, are you there?
going to be the
member of government. Yeah, sure, Kesob. Judge, may I please have a confirmation if I'm being recorded or not?
I think you are. Yes. Did you consent?
Fine. It's all right. So, just give me 10 seconds. I'll have a sip of coffee. Uh, uh, you have your camera on. So, yeah, Judge, I am back. I device after the 5th minute, please unmute your preference towards the closing. Great. So I will be beginning with my speech in 3, 2, 1. Frankly speaking, I have the cognitive when I think about the connection, right? I think communicate with them, but I also think that he can empathize with that person, right? But empathy is emotional, but also rational, right? I think that if I see someone crying, I can empathize with their struggle somewhat, right? But also, if I know the reason why they are crying or why they are struggling or the struggles they go through, I still think that I can be empathetic. But secondly, what meaning do we have in a life of this suffering, right? When I suffer day in and day out, right? I think then the daily jobs that I go through, right? I think the friends that I have, the relations that I have, the relations that I have to the society and my identity and its relations, right? Even if I want to kill someone or even if I want to love someone and have a crush, right? I think, but also when it comes to sacrifices, the sacrifices I make due to the choices I have to make due to limitations because I am human, right? But also when I am moved emotionally through music, through someone making me cry, right? I think because of all this, I can derive somewhat of meaning from suffering, right? But coming on to definition, I think this has been largely unclear from the opening. The definition of God in my miserable attempt, I think that the context right clearly tells us God is someone who is immortal and all powerful, right? And the motion only argues about the physical presence of God into our current world when we talk about God being one of us, right? If any of this definition is changed, I think then why the someone is still God. I think that for God to be present, we think there needs to be a definition about God being immortal and all powerful, right? And the motion then becomes, if any of this is changed, no God versus God existing, right? But I think the comparative over here is only God being one of us physically present versus not being one of us, right? Now coming on to first constructive that we have for you, right? That is human perceived God is more empathetic and sympathetic. I'm talking about only human perception, right? I think then firstly there is an assurance of human connection when God is physically present, right? But also then what is humanness, right? Again, rationality, emotional connect, the visceral reactions that I have, the visceral appeal that things do to me, right? But also me being inspired seeing someone, but also me struggling, right? Also me relating to someone. All this I believe are necessary for human connection, right? Then I think, but then I think that when things don't work out, I can still reach out to God for support, right? This does not look like me physically reaching out, but in sort of way that long distance relationships work even when they don't have each other, like me being separated from my mother and father and still knowing that they exist, and that is enough for me in order to derive some pleasure from my meaning for life, right? Because they exist, right? But coming on to how do we derive value from humanness, right? I think that there exist people people who want to believe in God, right? Regardless of whether they are being religion or no religion. It is far too late in the debate, right? Why is that? Because they struggle, right? And for example, talking about minority communities, right? I think that if there is a lack of access to minorities and the most vulnerable in the society to human rights, I think then what tells us they are still human, right? I think that the only necessary condition then comes that because they have faith and belief in there is meaning towards living a life, right? There is meaning in existing, right? I think therefore the pursuit of happiness is somewhat better when we know that God exists, right? And I think that most people only turn to God when they feel vulnerable, right? And I think that it becomes important for us to know that God exists, right? But coming on to opening opposition and their claims about human free will, I don't
UI.
think that the minorities, the people who are suffering, the trampled, the objectified, and the assaulted had any free will with regards to whether they want to be assaulted or objectified, right? I think then there does not exist free will in them claiming so, right? We are driven by societal narratives, what have we been taught from schools, right? The family that we have been born in. I think we are not inherently good, but only if we are good, that is because of societal narratives that are prevalent in the that are prevalent currently, right? Therefore, there is no free will either ways panel. That is how we weigh this opening clash for you, right? I think then we turn to God in believing so that there is going to be faith and there is and we believing
UI.
in God, right? Just like we look towards our national leaders and aspire to become something, right? Just like we right. And why did religion come in first place, right? I think as I've talked about, people want to believe in something who are religious, right? People had nothing to do because they have been so objectified, because they have so less access to resources, right? I think then instead of wanting to live a life of no meaning, they wanted to dwell in this human predicament and find meaning, right? Insofar as this as morality exists, we think that we think that we make human lives better and worth living and give them meaning
UI.
and happiness in believing in a God. POI shoot.
So the thing is, in status quo, What status quo looks like is that God is somewhere and we hope to meet him one day.
Great, I take
That
that
is
down.
what
Keep quiet,
drives
speaker. Right,
God
the
meaning.
comparative over here. That is there even a God? I think there is a slight confirmation of God when it comes to that, right? Because of immortality is not something that is unnoticeable. If someone is immortal, I think that we are more likely to notice is than them not being in front of us, right? I think then sightings of God are likely to be prevalent because media will report that, right? People will talk about sightings, right? And people see someone not getting old and not dying regardless of what happens, right? I think therefore there is going to be likely knowledge of God existing, right? But I think that I am also able to give God some meaning, right? God sees people crying because he is physically present, right? Because there is a human connection that God has now, because emotions become unavoidable for God too, as God exists, right? We think therefore there comes a connection with human morality. Human morality is not all rational but also emotional, right? I think that gives somewhat better epistemic access to even God, right? And through immortality, we think that this access is much more magnified, right? When God also has a physical presence, right? We think that God is all alone, right? But when it comes to God, I think God is also left slightly better. It is that when it is, I believe that high time that God finds some meaning, right? That even if it is through human meaning, that is still some meaning for God too, right? That being all from a speech panel, we have left God and humans better. That being all, thank you.
Thank member of government for that speech. We then call a member of opposition to present the case for closing opposition. Here. Member of opposition, can you hear me? Are you there? Guys, am I audible? Member of opposition. Okay.
I think he may be speaking.
Yeah, but I can't. Can you hear him? Because I can't. Can anyone else hear him?
I can't either.
Please. Yeah. The
Hello, am
member
I?
of opposition. Yeah, you're audible, but kind of breaking.
Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's
Oh, am
better
I
now.
still breaking?
No, it's better now.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks. So for POI, I'll be taking a pause within my speech to ask for POI, most likely from closing government. So just get yourself ready. Maybe my partner will take OG in their speech. Yeah, so I'm starting my speech shortly. Just hold on. Let me set up my timer and then we can start. Okay, so starting my speech in 3, 2, let's go. I think there is a very important nuance in this debate that no team has been able to consider, and that is the nature in which this particular motion is phrased. It is a preference motion, which means what does it necessarily mean for us to have a preferred word? A preferred word in itself refers to a word that is most likely restarting, and that is how human civilization most likely starts in government side of the house. Why is this most likely bad? And why is our side of the house in the name of status quo comparatively better? There are a couple of nuances we are going to be discussing with you from closing opposition, and that these particular nuances particularly answer this question. But there is another gray area of this debate nobody has been able to consider inherently. Think about this. What does the inability to access the evidence that God exists physically most likely do? And what are the pragmatic value it creates in the world that we live right now? And what would the absence of those particular value looks like in closing government and in opening government side of the house? Number one, what will most likely be the interpretation of law, culture, education, economics, special rights, all these sort of things? What would it most likely look like in closing government and in opening government world? Number one, are they most likely going to be decided by God, given the fact that the word in God's side of the house starts most likely with him as the only immortal and the most powerful individual? One, it can do these particular things through things like teaching and indoctrination of what his ideals and his values are. But two, he most likely also have to be the one that sanctions what punishment mechanisms will be. But three, reward system around individuals that conform to his ideals, most particularly his ideology, given the fact that this is how he most likely creates the world, will most likely be determined without any form of human interaction and the ability of the people to devise different means that are peculiarly beneficial to them. It most likely means that rewarding those who follow his thoughts and his processes would only be a world that is sound as moral in God's side of the house. It means, one, if we most likely buy a world that is most likely chaotic like status quo is, what are the values that are inherently beneficial there? These are the nuances that we are going to be engaging from closing opposition. Let's start. We think that the first thing, that the mere existence of God in human flesh directly erodes human dignity and the independence of choice mechanisms based on how opening government and closing government world will most likely be framed. Number one, in terms of perception. The mere example and the understanding that God lives on earth directly means that human inherently would always want to be based on the pattern of what his ideals are, and based on what his ideals of like his interaction and fellowship will most likely be in this particular and what's called society. But the second thing here is that this directly erodes the accountability that's supposed to exist within human interaction, independent of their sovereign belief in ideologies or the existence of God. Why is this most likely true? There are a lot of religious conflict and interpretation around the existence of God today, from one, people that believe that God exists, but two, people that don't necessarily believe that God exists. The only means at which they most likely cement their interaction and human relationship are based on their own diverse perception and values that they most likely use to cement that these are the evidence that God exists and these are the evidence that God doesn't exist. One, religious folks most likely want to like intensify on their moral principle to prove that these are the ways at which we most likely live, simply because this is what our supreme God most likely choose to believe in. The atheist community, particularly those individuals that don't most likely believe in God, have the ability to deconstruct those particular propositions and present a counter narrative that still mutually benefit the whole. That's why the science community are able to do a lot of advancement in terms of innovation, science, and text in order to solve common human problem, to put this religious body on the foot to say, no, you can still achieve all these particular benefits without any sort of like attachment to religious principles. Why? Because they don't even think that their existence is most likely governed by the existence of any sort of like God in itself. The pragmatic impact here is how you have been able to achieve that level of advancement in science and tech, advancement in terms of perspectives, advancement in terms of ideologies, even when all human race don't belong to the same religious blocks. So you have today Muslims, you have priests, you have Christians, you have different like strands and fashions of Christians who are able to fundamentally bring up a lot of value creation and ideologies if their conception and their perception of the existence of God are most likely conflicting. The reason why we most likely think this is quite important is that it intensifies the level at which humans can most likely explore their innate characteristics, which is the most intentional objective that God most likely wants them to do. So God creates you in order for you to create any other ideals that most likely benefit your world. We think that the mystery around the evidence of his existence is the only mechanism through which human can tap into the inherent core of the particular objectives and the inherent core of his own particular values in those particular instances. So if opening opposition tells you that it erodes choice mechanisms, we will be able to deepen that particular argument to show to you how this in itself pragmatically changed the world based on how it most likely forced humans to think deeper and deeply in those particular instances. Before I go into our second extension, I take that POI right now.
All right, so you guys talked about this eroding human dignity, but notice that God is not all powerful in this sense. So how is he going to have the power to force atheists to subscribe to things they don't want to subscribe to?
Let's say for the purpose of this debate, God is immortal and is all powerful. God in your side of the house is immortal and is all powerful. God in our side of the house is all immortal and is all powerful. You can't bring a different context. The debate says for the purpose of this debate, it means we are talking about the same God with the same characteristics and all that. The second extension here is on how it directly puts pressure on God and how this in itself destabilizes the ideological consistency of faith. The reason why God exists for particularly individuals that most likely want to like fund their faith or what's called their religious ideals is because they always want to use the absence of his existence to prove why they are most likely loyal. It means what's called eye service is what is most likely proliferated in God's side of the house. I can only prove I'm the best Christian today because I know that there's no particular God in maybe Oshogo that most likely have like surveillances around my area to know if I am a faithful servant. That idea in itself is what exclusively benefits religion. It means you will not have hypocrite faithful servants. You most likely have servants that are able to serve God, even to an extent where knives are most likely put on their neck. In Go OG and CG side of the house, you have Dominic. And you have faithful individuals that are most likely scared because saying no to God most likely means that their life is most likely on threat, what's called under threat. It means there is no particular level of confidence or any sort of like exclusive utility you achieve in faith proclamation in that side of the house. Our world is not perfect, but the means to its perfection is most likely solidified by the mirage of its existence and the ability for people to know that it's not in your environment and there is more space for you to internalize of faithfulness as well as your unique dignity. This is why
Yeah, we thank member of opposition for that speech. We then call on the government whip to summarize the case for the government. Here, government whip.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Just give me 20 seconds. Cool. Kesob here going as the government with. Firstly, shout out to Arya for agreeing to do Ued-Iv with me. Shout out to my desktop who's probably watching this stream, celebrate, love you, and to my friends who are probably watching this stream. I tried to take two POIs, one from opening, one from closing. Do not unmute yourselves, put it through the chat. Starting with my speech, is count of 3, 2, 1, go. I think I'll just take out our opening government first and prove why exactly do we win over our opening and that government is a CD wash. First, I guess our opening government goes in perfectly skews this motion and says that God is not immortal, God is not is not invincible or is not all powerful. I guess that is a very, very wrong skew and very, very squirreling of this debate and is uncharitable for side opposition now contesting this debate. At a point when they work onto a new content and new material, that is not true to this motion. They're already out. But then they say that religion gets better off. We prove to you that religion is something that gets better off on our side. Why? Now we because now religion is something that gets better off on our side of the case because now religion is able to evolve. Religion is able to change itself. Religion is shaped in a way the way humans want it. Why exactly do I say that? Understand. Arya perfectly goes and shapes it out that within the current status quo, when God is literally available to you, when God is literally going and watching how humans interact, how humans work in the first place, when that is literally true, what happens now is people at large are now becoming more and more aware of existence of God. People now know how exactly God works, which means people are not likely to go and politicize the religion that exists in the status quo more. What now happens is narratives are not shaped for the sake of patriarchy. Religious narratives are not shaped in the way God wanted them to be shaped in the first place. At a point when that is really very, very important in the that is happening on our side. Yes, it is actually good because now operations towards gender minorities, religious minorities are something that never exists in the first place. Impacts onto that more. I guess religion is able to evolve itself more because now God is interacting with humans more. God is able to make friends with humans. God is able to understand humans, which means God is also able to understand the operations of humans, which means that God is able to develop some level of sympathy towards minorities, is able to develop some sympathy towards people who are being oppressed. God is like to go and change the way religion is actually working in the first place. If that is true, people are able to uplift themselves, religions are able to evolve themselves quicker. Which means if queer rights movement literally took the 21st fucking century to go and change, that happens within the 15th or 16th century on our side of the case because now God is able to realize that queers are actually good and it is okay to be gay in the first place. If suffrage movement took to 1984 to go and reach India, it is actually being reached within 14th or 13th century within the world because God is now able to say that women are supposed to be equal to men. Now women are able to go and uplift themselves better because God is able to develop some level of sympathy towards women. God is able to see that women have equal capacities, have equal capabilities as men. When God is not able to see anything good by going and oppressing someone, that level of oppression is something that is reduced, which means religion is evolving. Because of which, I guess A, we go in outframe or opening on saying that why exactly is religion better off on our side. But B, we also prove to you that religion is actually able to evolve itself. Because of which, on a societal impact, religion is able to get better off either ways. But then, second idea that we are able to weigh over our opening with. I guess this is something that we only talk about. God is actually better off on our side. Why exactly do we say that? Understand that God is possibly lonely because he's possibly watching millions of centuries watching this particular world and is unable to go and interact with people. God is lonely. God is able to generate their own community for themselves. God is able to interact with people. God is able to make friends. God is getting happier on our side then. This is something that Arya goes and points out in the speech. But then, let's just take out opposition. Firstly, let us talk about O in this debate. O says that fear of God is something reduced. We say fear of God is something that can be easily dealt with. Why? Why? Because now God can be omnipresent. Understand, God is all powerful, which means God can be present at all points in time. God can literally go and manifest any superpower that humans think of, which means God is literally omnipresent and is present each and everywhere. That means people are still able to fear God. Two, if people are actually why do people commit crimes? This is something that is very, very important. If people are literally going in and committing crimes, if thieves are literally going and beating up people because they think God is not real and they probably think that they can get run away scot-free because there's no one to punish them. Now God exists in material form. God exists in a physical form, which means now they know that there's someone who is likely to go and punish them. That the morals and the teachings that have been taught to them are something which stand true because the person who has gone and taught that particular morals and teachings to them is actually existing in the status quo. If that is true, people are more likely to fear God. Now that means deterrence towards crime in our society is created because of people fear God. God exists. God, when God is existing, second level of impact that we now paint out. Opening opposition says that questioning God is something that is very, very bad. We say it is good. Understand, questioning of God happens in their side of the paradigm as well. But then people feel shit here because they never get answer to the particular questions onto their side of the case. The answer for those questions is actually answered on our side of the paradigm because hey, God is now omnipresent, God is existing everywhere. So if they possibly ask that, hey God, why the hell are you doing so many wrong things towards me? God is now likely to be there. God now answers the reasons why you are being wronged. What exactly were you doing wrong? This is actually good because of people are able to strengthen their faith. People are now able to trust God better. People are now able to fear God better. Three, people are able to understand where exactly had they went and done something wrong, which means chances of them improving on themselves, chances of them introspecting on themselves is something that is increasing on our side because of this particular thing. But then let's just take out another argument from their side of the case. Why exactly are we now getting over the entire opening bench? I guess they say God can be corrupted. Question number one. That can never happen because God is all powerful. I'm sure exactly why that happens. All powerful implies that God has the power to avoid distraction. God has the power to avoid being manipulated. If that is true, with an omnipresent God, God is able to derive better meaning from himself because God is now everywhere present. God is now physically present. If that is true, God is never able to corrupt themselves. But then God is also able to solve humans. God is able to make humans work on themselves because God is present over there. Which means if tomorrow a particular political leader is going and shaping religion, politicizing religion, and using religion as a tool for their political governance, God is likely going to slap that particular person for going and trying to do that. God is now likely going to correct that particular person. Morals are actually being followed. If morals are getting skewed, God can probably go and say that that was not what I had gone and taught to you. Which means if that is true, God is now able to correct morals. People actually follow the actual teachings of the God on our side of the case, which also means that religion is actually getting better off because people have better meaning of life to strive for, better meaning of life to understand, better morals to be understood in the first place. But before I continue, POI. 3, 2,
Protected.
1. No engage. Okay, cool.
Existence of that confusion about
Protected.
its existence is the reason why different
Protected
people
man.
have that conflict value, which collectively benefit human. Don't see
Protected
that
man.
on your side.
Give me protected man. Cool. Now then, let's just take out closing opposition. Closing opposition says that human civilization is something that is worse off. I guess that is not true because now human civilizations are able to get guidance from God from point one, which means now guidance from God is something that is existing. Which means that if now religion is saying that science is bad, God is able to understand that for evolution of humans, science is actually important. Which means God is now likely to go and let science develop. Which means more and more development are likely to be possible. Which means societal progression, societal expectations, and the way society wants to evolve itself is something that gets faster and quicker on our side. But then last, people are now able to see that God exists, a material form of God exists, which means faith, trust, and actual fear of God is something that is increasing on our side. When all of that actually happens, I guess we take this debate on a magnitude of scale. But then secondary impact that we get from closing opposition in this debate, they say that religion cool, proud to propose.
All right, we thank God Mary for that speech. We then invite opposition whip to summarize the entire debate. Guys, please, there's a timer on the chat space. The timer is not just for you when you're speaking, but also like in terms of engagement. So please, no one should ask a PY after it's out of order. Thank you. Opposition whip.
Yeah, I guess I'm audible.
Yeah, proceed.
Cool. Just set to my timer. So in 3, 2, 1, what OG and CG forgets about is God is as selfish as every single creator also, because he has his own ideologies, and because he has his own ideologies, he must make sure he sees them through, because those are things he fucking believes in and he thinks are the most appropriate morals. He doesn't give a shit about human perspectives, what they think life should also actually really looks like. And that is why that selfish pursuit is something that cannot be seen as that of humans. And that is why CG and OG cannot win the debate on human dignity and eroding the capacity of people to make their own free will choices. First rebuttal to CG. And listen, CG grounds the case from CEO that says that you are eroding human dignity when they tell you that questioning God is a good thing, for example. No, it's not actually a good thing, because when you question him, you are questioning his reputation. What he will likely do is not to condone you and say that you questioning him is right. He will likely strike you and kill you to serve as deterrence to all other particular human beings that may want to actually really question his power and think that they can question him and say that he's not all powerful. That is what he will likely really do. And the incentive is there for him to do so, because nobody can hold him accountable. Who the hell is going to hold him accountable? Is it your monarch or your government or whatever structures that may exist in that particular case, even if CG and OG didn't prove that? Nobody can hold God accountable. That is why he's highly likely to do that without really not caring. And that is why questioning is a bad thing. Meaning, you don't get to have free speech. You don't get to have the capacity to freely express your opinions. And that is why your dignity there is eroded. And mind you, it's a preferred world. It starts with God as the most powerful and immortal being, implying that every single particular thing about society revolves around him. He sends the ideas on teaching of what morals are supposed to be from his perspective, not your perspective. Implying he tells you what's what sexual rights should look like, what kind of science research that you should do. For example, we don't think that in God's world, in CG and OG's world, where he physically exists as a human being, is likely to condone scientific researches or any form of other human researches that are seeking to disprove his power. For example, he's highly likely to climb down on them and fix them back, probably kill them to serve as evidence to the scientific community to never really try that. This is evidence with even human beings who were Roman empires, who necessarily needed to kill them because those particular researchers were against their own powers and their very existence, and for the reasons why they had so much sufficient influence in the society. And that is why that particular thing will not happen. You don't get innovation, human beings will not be able to explore, because God is the gatekeeper of knowledge, gatekeeper of law, gatekeeper of culture, gatekeeper of every single particular thing that borders on human existence. That's why CG affirms the idea of human dignity and right to choice taken away fully. What does this mean? Because member of opposition established to you what a preferred world means. A preferred world where God is the one who is the only immortal person and overly powerful. Notice that that is the start of human civilization,
Right.
implying humans are likely going to be submissive to him because they have never seen any immortal or all-powerful individual in their flesh before, and that's their first time. That is why that will happen. But secondly, it means for every history book or books that will be written or narratives, all will be that every single human being that comes out, you have to submit yourself to this particular person because these particular reparations actually really exist. Which means at the get-go, from CG and OG's world, you never have the capacity as a human being to have any amount of dignity and ability to have any particular kind of choice. All of this is gatekept by God. The biggest impact that you get from CO is that exclusively CO has proven how you can never be able to opt out of God's beliefs, because God is the start, and that is how the world is going to be in CG and OG's world. And that is what they actually really fall out in this debate. On the comparative, we beat CG in that particular regard because CG's God is the one who's going to prevent human beings from being able to have their right to make any particular choices or decide how their lives are going to actually really look like. The second most important thing, CG says there's free will. There's never free will in their world, right? Even if there's no free will in our world, at least in our world, God is not physically existing. You can opt out of believing in God. You can opt out of God's morals because he's not here. But secondly, in our world, it is not God that is existing as your government. It is not God that is existing as the economy. You can opt out of a government by voting them out or protesting or send them to court for compensations. You have a means to fight against any particular structure of power in our world, the status quo, if they or actions that comes down upon your free will. That is permanent also in CG and OG's world. That is why exclusively in their world, it is irreparable when they harm that human and never have the capacity to opt out of the process, right? But let me take OG.
All right. So your member did not understand my POI, so try answering it. You hate our word because in our word, God living amongst people erodes human dignity because people have no motivation to proselytize and force God on people, right? But if God is so
CG, I'm not
powerful
taking you. I'm not taking you. CG,
then
choose your POI.
At a
Hey,
at a
Mike,
point,
what is
CG,
this?
at a point in time, I have nothing to do in the world because I have been so oppressed. Do you think that it is free will that drives me to existence or faith?
Yes, it is free will that gives you that ability to choose that good or bad. The fact that you can't decide that particular choice for yourself, even if you wanted to deciding, it is a choice that is being imposed upon you. That is how you measure free will. And secondly, you measure free will by your capacity to be able to hold that particular free
Yeah.
will accountable and be able to repair
Yeah.
any particular forms of it. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Can you
I
hear?
can hear you.
All right. So
Yeah.
please pause. Yeah. Please pause. So you're going to continue from where you were responding to the POI. I paused your time, but please order in the house. I beg of you guys, order in the house.
Where
So
where was I?
you at 5:40, right? 5 minutes
Yeah.
40 seconds. Respond
Okay.
to that POI from CG and start from there.
Okay.
Please mute your mic
Eh,
if you're not opposition whip. Please, guys, order. Mute your mic if you're not opposition whip. DSM, could you please mute your mic? Thanks. All right. Opposition whip, proceed.
Okay, in 3, 2, 1. So the reason why free will is non-existent in CG and OG's world, especially CG, and the reason why even if it exists, it is bad because you, the human being, you're not the one actually really deciding that particular decision. It is God that is imposing it upon you. The fact that you lack the ability to be able to choose that particular good choice by yourself or choose that bad choice by yourself, that is why it is not existing. But even if it does exist, it's not meaningful and it's bad for you. But secondly, the fact that in CG's world, even when you want to opt out of God's capacity to subject you to take away your free will, it is not existent because I've explained to you the incentive of God to want to clamp down on you to serve as deterrence to any significant freaking human being in their preferred world to know that when you come against me, there is a reparation. And that is how he's going to project how all powerful it is. Because what sense it is if you are all powerful and people can undermine you? You get a logic in your OA. I think you should inculcate that. What this actually really means, CO has proven exclusively why at the start of the world in OG and CG's world, you are going to erode away human dignity, capacity of humans to have even any significant amount of free will. But secondly, how they can be able to repair those particular harms and opt out of God's decisions and what want to direct their lives how it should look like. That is non-existent. This is an exclusive benefit that only CO has been able to show. And the reason why it should beat OO is because OO does not explain to you what this preferred world actually really is like and what it means for human civilization and how God actually really is going to operate and practicalize this particular power of his and why he's going to take away that particular free will permanently. And this is a very big delta that should beat any particular government team. The reason why we also beat OO is that we are able to explain to you how this particular ability to have free will or human dignity is something that is harmed permanently and can't be repaired by humans. And secondly, OG is out for obvious reasons. They miscalculate the emotion and think that God is not all powerful. We are proud to oppose.
All right. We thank Opposition Whip for that speech and for bringing this debate to a close. Thank the speakers for the round, even though it got pretty rowdy towards the end. So, guys, you could please go wait in the briefing room. My panelists, please join me immediately in the adjudication channel.
Thanks for the debate, everyone.